I would cry. Oh, and I tell distant parents, fathers who are in a situation like that, do not try to remove your child from your mind and your soul. The more you try, the more painful it's going to be. And so it was torture for me for 15 years without him in my life, physically in my life. It was torture for me because it was like demons were hunting me. You know, I would just dwell on what it would feel like to touch my son, what it would feel like to hug my son, what it would feel like to walk with my son.
This is Dadography, a podcast with stories and insights on fatherhood from dads around the globe, dedicated to providing you with the tools and tips to become a better dad. I'm your host, Corey Wolf. Well, welcome everybody once again to the Dadography podcast, where our goal is to gain insights on fatherhood from dads around the globe. Today, we've got a father who is located in the United States of America, Trent Stevens. Trent, I want to welcome you to the show. How you doing today, man?
Hey, man, I'm doing good, man. It's Saturday. I'm healthy. I'm alive. I get to see another day on this amazing planet. So I'm doing good, brother.
I hear you, man. That's fantastic. Well, if you don't mind, man, tell me just a little bit, or at least share with me a little bit about yourself for the sake of the audience, man.
Well, I'm a native of Chicago, the famous Windy City. Born and raised there. Went to college in Illinois. I went to Western Illinois University in Macomb, Illinois, where I did both my degree and Army ROTC, and received a commission as a second lieutenant in the Army. Did a career in the Army. I'm a father of two. I'm the oldest sibling of three. Currently still have my mother living. My father unfortunately passed away in 91 in a car accident. And currently I work in a program that helps low-income, first-generation students, predominantly Latinx and Black and brown students, who are pursuing a dream to become either a medical doctor or a dentist. And I enjoy the work that I do for that particular population.
Sounds pretty interesting, man. Almost sounds like you could be, or are to some degree, a surrogate father for many children as they try to pursue their medical and dental careers. That's real interesting, man.
What's funny is that you say that is because the average age of my students are the same age as my son. So I have a son and a daughter, and then I have up to about 70 other sons and daughters. So
sounds like you're in an excellent position to be able to share with myself and some of our listeners some pretty good tips and insights, man. How old are your kids anyway?
So my daughter, she is 16, and my son is 26.
Wow. Okay, so we got about 10 years difference in there. I see, man. You mentioned earlier that your father unfortunately passed away in a car accident in the 90s. But what was he like? What was your experience like with your father growing up?
Before I share that, I'll share this one part.
Okay.
My entire life, I was told that the father that raised me wasn't my biological father. And so for many years, I struggled with that. Even to this day, my mom still gives me the name of another man that was my father, biological father. But the father that passed away in the car accident in 91, my memories can go back as far as 49 years. I can remember 49 years back. And the only father figure that was standing in front of me at the age of 5 was the father who was killed in the car accident. So that's my father. So now I can tell you about that father.
Well, let me jump in right there, though, Trent.
Yeah.
I think that I appreciate the fact that though he may not have been your biological father, that even on a platform like this publicly, you make it a point to say, hey, he was my father. And I think that's significant for dads, because there are some stepdads out there, or dads that have stepped into the role of being the father. And there's the curiosity perhaps in the recesses of their mind. What is this child going to think about me, 10, 15, 20 years from now? And I would hope that it's encouraging to dads to know that in a situation where you weren't raised per se by your biological father, that you view him as your father, point blank, like this on a public platform. I appreciate that, man. That's really good information. So tell me about him, man. What was he like? What was the experience like growing up with your father?
Okay, well, visibly, which is funny, visibly you would easily say, how is that his son? And so visibly, my dad was a massive man. He was a big man. He was a gentle giant. My father was a father who loved to hug his boys. He loved to give his boys a big kiss on the cheek. He was very affectionate. My dad was a romantic man, and he instilled in his boys romance. So we carried that over to our relationships. He taught us how to give flowers, how to open doors, how to cook meals, how to give our significant other manicures and pedicures. Chivalry was really big for him. My dad was a very fashionable dresser. So we knew how to match the socks with the belt and the belt with the tie. We knew how to match the shirt with the tie. He taught us all that at a young age. So
Right.
even though my dad wasn't actively in the house after my mom and dad got divorced, he was very active in my life, my whole life. I was very fortunate to have a dad outside of the home there all the time. I was very fortunate to have a dad outside of the home to give financially. I remember one time I found a plastic garbage bag, hefty garbage bag in the garage, my mother's garage. And I opened up the bag one day, and the bag was half full with checks that had been voided out. He was paying his child support, and she would keep the checks. And this bag was half full of checks. So that's the kind of dad that I had. He was a hard worker. He wasn't an educated man. He didn't even finish high school because he was the oldest of his siblings. He had to play the father in his household because his father was an absent father. He never even knew his father. And so my dad was my rock, was my brother, was my soulmate. I could think something and he would feel it. I could start a conversation and he would end it. I remember one day calling my dad at work and I was all happy. Hey, Dad, how you doing, bro? I miss you. I love you. I love you, Dad. Hey, I'm about to go to school, about to go to class. And I hung up the phone. He called me back within 30 seconds and he said, what's wrong with you? And there was something wrong with me, but I tried to hide it. That's how connected we were. So that's the kind of dad that I had.
That's significant. I think that says a lot about the depth and intimacy of the relationship. That's something that I think every dad should aspire to and hope to have with their kids, man, Because
of the dynamic of my dad being my dad, I have a sister who has a different dad. I have a brother who's for sure the dad who died in a car accident is his dad. But my dad, for some reason, protected and cared for me more than my brother, who I consider the biological son. Okay. For some reason, my dad was like the Secret Service when it came to me.
What would you say is your fatherhood style, Trent?
Well, I'll be honest with you. My mother was extremely abusive, physically and mentally abusive to me out of the three siblings. Okay. I never wanted to have kids because I was afraid that abuse would transfer over to my children. Okay. And so when I had my first child, my son, I was a nerve wreck because I'm like, oh my God, please don't let my mother's generational curse affect my fatherhood. Right. And it did not. My father, at the time my son was born, was deceased because my son was born in 94. And what I did is I just tapped into my father's fathering and I just applied that. And I'm a loving father. I'm a comical father, a funny father. It's not out of the ordinary for my kids to be laying on the ground laughing at something I did or being embarrassed being out with me because I'm just a free spirit comic.
Right.
I remember one time coming out of a Walmart, I was being comical and my daughter was like, "Dad, you're embarrassing me." And this customer saw me and she said, "Honey, you better appreciate that." So I'll never forget that. I'm the type of father, I'm very open. I can talk to my kids about anything. My son about women, my daughter about men, or whoever they want to be with. I'm able to have that conversation with them. They can come to me and they don't feel ashamed about a topic.
Right.
I'm a father who listens first. I'm a father who knows I was that age at one time. So you got to give them a little bit slack in the rope.
Right.
Because they're going to do the things that you did. And I think my kids genuinely love me and appreciate the kind of fathering. I've never showed one sign of physical abuse or physical anything. I might raise an eyebrow sometime.
Right.
But no abuse, physical, mental, emotional, that will not cross into my domain.
Yeah, evidently, your experience between, your mother and your father, it seems to be that they were different. Your mother being abusive and your father being this gentle giant, to use your words. Do you think that for that reason you ultimately became the type of father that is, and I'm assuming, because I haven't asked you, are you affectionate with your kids? Is that something that was, translated over to you? It doesn't sound like you fell on the side of your mom's parenting style at all.
I hug my daughter. I kiss my daughter. Every Valentine's Day, she gets a box of candy, a bouquet of roses, a card and balloons. I've been doing that since she was born.
Well, hold on now. What I'm getting is some reminiscence of your dad, because you mentioned that he was a romantic. And do you think it's pretty important for dads that have, daughters to express this type of, fatherly romance, flowers and candies and kisses and, maybe even, a coffee date or something like that? Do you think that's important for a girl dad?
Yes.
Why so?
Well, I tell you, I'm a strong believer that it is the responsibility of a dad to groom and prep a daughter so she can have the skills and the tools needed to find a good man. So many daughters don't get that from their fathers, and they end up with the wrong men that are abusive, men that cheat. And so what I do is, when my daughter was 2 years of age, I would take her to get pedicures and manicures. When she was 2 years of age, at the age of, I think, 5 is when we started doing daddy-daughter annual balls, where I would buy her these beautiful gowns and get her hair done and makeup done. And I'd put on my tuxedo and we'd go out to these balls and we'd dance and we'd have a good time. I think if daddies do that for their daughters, then when it's time for them to find their man or their mate, I think now they have something to compare to. Fathers got to do that for their daughters.
Okay.
They have to.
Yeah. I really appreciate the, I don't know, the romantic aspect of fatherhood. This is our second season, Trent, but I don't think we've had a father share with us the importance, as you have, of being romantic towards your daughter, and that it's preparation for her ability to have a healthy relationship later on in life. What is a really cool highlight that you've had so far? I mean, your daughter's 16. What's something that's a really cool highlight that you remember in raising your daughter so far?
I think the biggest highlight between me and my daughter is that I'm divorced from her mom. We got divorced when she was age, I want to say 2 or 3.
Okay.
And it took about 2 years to get through the aftermath of the divorce and let the dust settle and the smoke clear. But when she hit about 5, from age 5 to about age 14, every time I would visit my daughter, and try to stay in a hotel, her mother and her mother's husband refused to allow that to happen. I was given a guest room in their home and a key to their house to come and go as I please. And we also do family vacations together, and we share the same hotel suite. We don't even do separate rooms.
Wow.
And I think the highlight of that relationship with my daughter is that so many divorced parents forget about the child, and all the decisions they make is about him and her and not the child. So I think my daughter seeing that, it is so healthy for her. She enjoys seeing her two dads drinking a beer together and laughing. She enjoys seeing me and her mom and her dad and her in the kitchen, all cooking dinner together. One's cutting this, one's chopping that, one's sauteing this, one's doing that. We're all in the kitchen. And we've done that all the way up until age 15, when she started driving and getting out with her friends. And then I was finding that when I was going to visit, she wasn't in the house that much. So it didn't make sense now for me, my ex-wife and her husband, 3 adults, to be in the house while the daughter's gone. So I'm a very spiritual man, and there was a point where the Holy Spirit told me, Trent, you've done your job. Now it's time to cut the umbilical cord as far as the relationship you have with the ex-wife and Daddy Steve. We don't do stepfather. He's Daddy Steve. I'm Daddy Trent.
Sounds like a healthy co-parenting situation, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth. Now, I know from a conversation we had previously, and I just would like to revisit it. Your daughter is biracial, and so has that presented any unique aspects of fatherhood?
She's half Asian, half Black.
Okay.
And then in the Asian part, she's half Thai, half Chinese. But she looks African-American.
Yeah. So with different, I guess, 2020 and maybe even before, but different racial, tensions, challenges there in the United States, what type of unique aspects of fatherhood or conversations have you had to have with your daughter dealing with race? And you mentioned that her stepfather is also not African-American and not Asian. So there's another element there as it relates to race relations.
So my ex-wife, as I said, is Asian. Her husband is white, Irish. My daughter's biracial, and I'm Black. But I have a Colombian look. So a lot of people, when I tell them I'm African-American, they're like, that's impossible. But I am. I'm Black on my driver's license. I'm Black on my birth certificate, and I'm treated like a Black man every day I will walk out into the world. So I'm Black.
Okay.
So that's a real unique dynamic. One of the things that I had feared when my daughter was born, especially when my ex-wife married her husband, who's white, I was like, oh my God, my daughter's about to be lost. And it took a lot of these crimes that are happening against Black people in our nation. It took those things to happen in the news for my ex-wife to see that, the George Floyds. And when she started to see these, the Blackness in her daughter started to resonate more. It started to come out more. She became this Asian mother who used to say, okay, I got a half Black child. I need to embrace her and protect her. And so as my daughter was growing up, I was afraid, okay, is my daughter going to be a biracial kid that is confused? Because I know a lot of biracial kids have an identity issue. And so one day when my daughter was about 5 or 6, I said, honey, what's your race? She said, Daddy, I'm a half Black, and I'm a third Chinese, and I'm a third Thai. And then she went back to play with her toys. And when she said that to me, I was like, you know what? I will never have to worry about her having an identity issue.
Right.
That was like the major milestone for me. And she has friends that are Black, white, green, orange, yellow, and she maintains her identity.
I wonder if, as fathers, if you don't have biracial children, a lot of times if we get too hung up on race. For example, You know, if you're a Black family, you want to make sure that your children have the Black experience. If you're a white family, you want to make sure that they have this white experience, or and so on. It seems that you've done and are doing a really good job of making sure that your daughter embraces all aspects of her ethnicity. And I think that's a good thing, man. I think that's a really good thing. But are there opportunities where she has had to, she's been able to explore her Chinese side or her Thai side, or is that, you know, distant because mom's been in the U.S. for so long? Or?
Well, what's fascinating about that is when Myra was born in 2004, her mother was adamant about Myra having dual citizenship. So my daughter has both a U.S. passport and a Thai passport. And my daughter has been to Thailand maybe about 4 or 5 times. She is as involved with her Thai grandparents and nieces and nephews and cousins. So my daughter is very connected to her Asian side of her family. But she assimilates more as just a person. She don't assimilate to an ethnic group. She's just a person with a plethora of just race and culture at her disposal, but she didn't get all caught up into it.
It sounds like fathers who have biracial children should really strive to help the children know and be familiar with their ethnicity in every aspect.
Yeah, but you know, a lot of parents, I've seen this, a lot of parents, they want to pull their kid to one race.
Okay.
I've seen Black and white parents, and the parents tend to want to pull the kid to this side instead of this side. And then when you pull them to this side, the problem is, especially if they look more like the other side, and then they start getting treated the way the people on the other side get treated, then it becomes a problem for them. Okay. You know, like my friend the other day, I said, has anybody ever called your son the N-word? And he said, no. And I said, well, the first time he hear that, he ain't gonna know what to do. He gonna be ready to jump off a bridge.
Right.
You know, because he's been living this other life. Mm-hmm. And now somebody just reminded him that your blood is mixed with this other side. So yeah, being biracial is a challenge. As a parent, I tell all parents, if you are biracial, you have a biracial child, you owe it to that child to bring them up in both cultures, to give them the experience to taste cuisine from both sides of the house, to travel to both lands, Thailand and U.S. My daughter's been everywhere. My daughter is a phenomenal chef at age 16, and she can cook Thai food as much as she can cook soul food.
That's fantastic. That's good stuff. I appreciate you know the insights you're giving there as it relates to that. So, girl dads or raising girls, it's been said that it's different from raising boys. I'd like to know what's something or a time where you were just overwhelmed with joy because of your daughter.
Okay, I was overwhelmed with joy on 2004 at around 11:30 p.m. My wife was having contractions, and I was in the living room, and she was in the bathroom sitting on the toilet. And she said, honey, I think the baby is coming. And I said, yeah, right, honey. Yeah, right. So I get up, I walk to the bathroom door. I look in the bathroom. She's sitting on the toilet, holding my daughter's head.
What?
Hey guys, this is Corey, host of the Dadography podcast. This episode is sponsored by and dedicated to you. Thanks for all your feedback and support. I mean that. However, if this is your first time tuning in, please be sure to subscribe. And if you've done that already and you're getting some value from our interviews with dads from around the globe, please share. Teamwork makes the dream work. Now back to the show.
Yes, she's sitting on the toilet with my daughter's head hanging out of her. And I grab both of them and I help her get down to the floor, and I rest my wife's back up against the bathtub. And then I tell her to push, and she pushed, and my daughter slid across the bathroom floor. All the afterbirth came out, and my daughter wasn't breathing. She was dark purple. She wasn't moving. And I looked up at God, and I said, God, please don't take my daughter away from me. And when I said that, my daughter started to cry. And that was the greatest moment. I called 911. They came and got the two of them. And then I went to the hospital to be with the two of them. So that was my greatest moment with my daughter.
Trent, that's an awesome, awesome story. I have never heard of a dad, and I'm sure there are examples, but me personally, I've never heard of a dad that had the joy of not just being present at the birth of his child, but being able to play, obviously, the significant role of being, for lack of a better term, the doctor that assisted in birthing his child. That's awesome, man. So she's 16. You mentioned how she's confident. She's very comfortable in her skin. And usually I'd imagine at that age, young men, begin to be attracted to her or what have you. Have you guys had discussions about relationships and things of that sort?
Yeah. I always ask her, you like boys yet? You like boys yet? And I know my daughter, and she's not really into boys right now. It's funny. She's not into boys, and my son, he's not into relationships either. I'll say, you got a woman. I'm not feeling that right now. I'm in another space right now. Now, my daughter, bless her heart, but she got rainbow flags all over her room. So sometimes I'm like, you know what? Maybe one day, LGBTQ community. But, that's my child, and I don't care either one of my children. I don't care whoever they bring in front of me and say, this is my mate dad. Mm-hmm. I don't care about gender and race. That's no factor in the equation. Gender and race of their significant other has no place in my heart.
We had a father from Jamaica last season, Richard. He's a good friend of mine. And he said that one of the primary goals, if not the, is to prepare our children for happiness. And so it sounds like your perception or the way that you're approaching fatherhood is one where you are trying to allow them to be themselves. It just sounds like you just want to love them immensely. I think that's real healthy.
I was given love as a child, even with all the abuse that I was having. And it's so sad because my father never knew the abuse I was going through with my mom because I never knew how to tell him.
I really get the vibe that you had in your upbringing. There were like two sides of the coin in terms of how you were treated by your parents. And it really sounds like your dad was this positive influence. And I can see how that influence has flowed right into you in terms of the way you father your children. And I'm hopeful that it will serve them well, and that positiveness from your dad will continue to flow on even into the next generation. You've mentioned your son a few times, Trent. Man, I know because we've conversed that relationship has been tried. You mind sharing a little bit about, what was the cause of the strain and how the reconnection came to fruition?
His mom was my first love. She was the first woman that I was intimate with, and I was the first man that she was intimate with. So as you know, your first love is going to be special. And for me, as I was growing up, I was raped as a young boy. I never told anybody but my mom. And I had always had this issue with my manhood. And so I met this amazing woman. She's amazing. My son's mother is amazing. I mean, amazing. God bless me with an amazing woman. But because I had this identity issue with my manhood, I didn't want to just go through life with only have been with one woman. And so I had to prove to myself, being a rape victim, that I wasn't gay. I always felt this like, am I gay? Is something wrong with me? Did this happen to me because of this? And so I wanted to sow my oats. And I went out there and I sowed my oats and got caught and lost the love of my life. And so when I lost the love of my life, now I got the love of my life gone, and I got this child. And when I lost her, I couldn't even look at her. If I was standing in front of her, I could only stare at the ground talking to her. And over the years, I found it was easier to stay away from her since it was so painful. But what I failed to understand was when I'm standing away from her, I'm standing away from my son.
Right. Now you were a young father. You were a young father at the time. How old were you?
I was in my 20s, middle 20s. I was a young father. I was madly in love, but I didn't know that love required honesty and loyalty and trust. And I'll never forget. And also, my father was killed too. And that attributed to me developing this free spirit. And so when I lost her, like I said, it was too overwhelming for me.
Yeah.
And so instead of staying in the same town that she was in with my son, I just threw all the stuff I owned in my Jeep, and I left Minneapolis, is where they were. I left. And I'll never forget the day I told her I was leaving, and she had this look on her face like, oh my God.
Leaving her or leaving the state? Because
leaving the state of Minnesota.
Okay.
And when she saw that, you could see in her eyes that was hard for her. And I was leaving her with our son, and I left to start a master's. I figured use that pain to do something positive. So I went to grad school.
Okay.
And the years kept going by. I don't know what it is about when you walk away from your child. Why do the years go by so fast?
Do you feel like, looking back at it now, do you feel like, well, one, is there a level of regret? And then two, do you feel like you took something positive, a master's degree, and use that as an excuse to do something negative, that is to say, moving away from your son?
No, I've never put an excuse in the equation. I always felt horrific about the decision that I made. My son, I'll never forget. I will never forget this. This will be in my mind till the day I die. I remember walking out of my apartment building in Minneapolis.
Okay.
And the new man that was in his mom's life was dropping my son off. And my son was 2. And this guy, he had to park about a half a block away because I was the only parking spot he could find.
Right.
And when he got out of the car and walked around and took my son out of the car seat and put my son on the ground, my little son looked at me a half a block away. He saw me, and he took off running towards me with his arms wide open. And he jumped up in my arms and embraced me. And I always see that image in my mind because that boy had a lot of love for me at 2.
You just gave me the overwhelming moment of joy with your son, right?
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I can feel that.
For a 2-year-old is to have that much love and need. Oh, and the man that was with his mom now, he was holding my son's hand. And my son yanked his hand from him. He physically yanked his hand from him and took off running towards me. So that's the most painful thing for me, is that a son with that much love had to endure almost 15 years of not seeing his dad.
Before we get into that a little deeper, I think it's interesting to observe how a child values their father, and perhaps that's taken for granted sometimes, especially if you're just in the child's life from day to day. So there's this I think there's a quote or a refrain that says, familiarity builds contempt. Just contempt for the fact that you have your child and you perhaps don't consider how much you actually mean to them and how much they love you. The picture you paint for me of your son pulling away from his mother's significant other at the time and running to you, arms open, jumping to be held by you, really speaks to the value a child holds for their father, you know? So you guys were separated, and you just mentioned it was a 15-year trek. Take me on an emotional journey through this 15 years of separation, Trent, if you don't mind.
Okay, well, when we broke up and I left and I went to grad school was torture for me because I could not get my son out of my heart and my soul. I would cry. Oh, and I tell distant parents, fathers who are in a situation like that, do not try to remove your child from your mind and your soul. The more you try, the more painful it's going to be. And so it was torture for me for 15 years without him in my life, physically in my life. It was torture for me because it was like demons were hunting me. You know, I would just dwell on what it would feel like to touch my son, what it would feel like to hug my son, what it would feel like to walk with my son. When is he going to graduate from kindergarten? When is he going to graduate from preschool? When he's going to graduate from middle school, high school? I missed all that.
Right.
And so it was I couldn't breathe sometimes. Like I would become just hyperventilating of the thought of not knowing where my son is and what he's doing and how he feels and does he have enough money and this and that. So it was hell for me during the time that I wasn't connected with my son. And COVID, you know, my daddy used to always say, for every negative thing, you can find 10 things that are good in it.
Okay.
And for me, COVID, the number one good thing out of COVID for me was that my son started seeing fathers dying of COVID. And it triggered him to say, look, if my dad died from this pandemic, I would have never have known him. And one day he just randomly texts me and says, hey, when you got a minute, can we talk? And I said, sure. I was scared to death, Corey.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Wow. So
I was scared
randomly
to death, randomly out of the blue.
Yeah.
It was a Sunday, and he just texted, hey, when you get a chance, can we talk? And I was shaking. My hands were sweating. And I said, sure. And I finished church, and I called him, and then we were talking on FaceTime. Mm-hmm. And he just said, hey, Dad, you know, he just said, hey, I apologize. I had you in a dark, dark place. And I realized that, and I want to reach out to you. Mm. And then we started a conversation. We started calling each other. And one day I called his mom and I said, you think he might want me to visit? And she said, yes, I'm confident that you should visit. Okay. And I asked him if I could come. He was ecstatic. And so I planned the trip. I get there. I'll never forget the day when I got this awesome video I did walking from my hotel room down to the lobby to see him for the first time in almost 15 years.
Can you share that video with us so we can share it with the audience?
Yeah, I gotta find it, but yes, I'll share it. But I felt like, and I'm not trying to be mean, but I felt like a death row inmate walking the last mile.
Wow.
That's the only thing I could compare it to, is I was a death row inmate walking the last mile.
Stomach churning, palms sweaty, nervous, afraid.
Praying, vocalized prayer, hands in the air. And I get to the lobby and I walk outside and I see him and he sees me. Oh, I do want to add this real quick. Even though it was 15 years, I did see him a couple of times when he was a teenager, when his mom brought him to visit his sister in 2004 when she was born.
Okay.
And then after that, never again. I didn't see him again. So it was from age 2 in 94. And then I didn't see him again until like a real visit until his sister was born. And after that, dormant. And so I get downstairs, I walk out, I see him, he sees me, we embrace each other, and he's now 6'2". I'm 6 feet, he's 6'2". So I'm embracing this young man. I got my head planted on his chest, and I'm hugging him. And I realized a hug that lasts a minute is a long hug. And I look up, and he's got this look on his face like he don't know what to do because he got this dad with this vice grip hug on him. Right. And we're just standing there. And my son is a very gentle person. He's gentle. And so he absorbed all of that. He absorbed everything that I gave him. And then from that point on, we were like two peas in a pot. And one thing I'm going to say to fathers in the same situation as me, do not try to make up lost time. Hit the reset button the day you reconnect and move forward. Don't talk about why you wasn't there. Don't unless they ask you, don't bring it up. So many fathers make the mistake as they reconnect, then they try to go back. Okay. No, go forward.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much for that insight, man. I think that's tremendous value because, like you said, fathers do tend to go back and want to give the explanations. So you guys are in Minneapolis, Minnesota, both of you being men of color. Did you guys have any sort of conversation as it relates to the whole George Floyd happening? And I only asked that not to necessarily be relevant with the times, but I asked that specifically because at that moment, when you guys met, that's kind of something that was going on, and you guys are right there at the core of what's happening. Tell me a little bit about maybe the conversation or experiences or things that you guys did as it relates to that.
One thing I've always admired about his mom is she's about her blackness, and she instills blackness in her son. Mm-hmm. And so while I was visiting, we had the great honor and pleasure to go to the George Floyd Ground Zero site where he was assassinated, where he was murdered, where he was killed. And to bring a son of color to that location is like going to the Mecca. It's no other experience. I cannot explain it. Mm-hmm. If you are a father, no matter what the race is, if you're a father, but especially a father of a black and brown child, a son, you need to take that son and daughter to that location. And it was amazing. My son is very into understanding the struggles that we're going through in our nation right now. And I love that about my son. We talk about race. We have very open conversations about race. I think fathers need to ask their children, have you experienced any unjust problems? Because I know kids who experience it, they never share with their parents, and then it turns into something terrible inside of them. So we as parents in this day and time, we got to talk about race. We got to talk about it. You can't be that person who is so afraid to mention it, because if you don't, your child ain't gonna know how to deal with it. So it was an amazing experience going there, seeing the George Floyd site, and it was an amazing conversation we had about race relations that entire week. And it's funny because most of our time, that's what we were talking about. We weren't talking about the time we missed. We were talking about the stuff that's happening right now.
Thinking about what you said earlier and how you're able to talk with your children about sexuality, and then hearing you talk about, how you've discussed with them race. One thing I'm going to walk away with, Trent, is it's important to approach and discuss and listen to your children on the hard topics, address the elephants in the room, and I think fathers will do well if they address the hard topics. And I think it'll foster intimacy, closeness, and just kind of strengthen those bonds. I really think so, man. Trent, you've mentioned a divorce and then a split, periods away from your children, specifically with your daughter's mother, being in a situation where you have to co-parent, what advice would you give to fathers that are in a co-parenting situation?
The number one thing is leave your pride at the door. Because as men, how prideful we can be, brother. And one thing about co-parenting is parents need to remember that there was one time in your life that you and your spouse was madly in love and supported and respected each other.
Right.
So I tell divorcees and people who break up from relationships, when it's for the child, dig deep in your soul and find whatever you had back in the day that made you respect each other. Find that again and regain that respect for each other so your child can benefit from it.
Well, Trent, you have given me a lot to think about. You've certainly taken me on a journey that I did not expect, from birthing your child to being able to take your son or spend time with your son in the George Floyd location where he was assassinated, dealing with, just some of your hardships of coming up and being able to avoid those hardships or superimposing those on your children and kind of intentionally going the opposite direction. I feel like I've got a lot to ponder and grow from having this conversation with you, man. I want to express my gratitude for you coming on the show today. I really appreciate it, man. Thank you. Thank you for coming on to Dadography. Thank you for sharing with us so transparently different aspects of your personal life and allowing us to look through the looking glass of fatherhood through your eyes. And I do hope that our listeners have gotten a lot of good ideas that they can implement in their journey of fatherhood. Thank you for coming on to this show.
No problem. I feel that our purpose in life is to share stories because there's somebody somewhere out there struggling with the same thing. And if something in my story can help them overcome their struggles, then I did my job. And like Muhammad Ali always says, service to others is the rent that we pay to be on this earth. So that's why I'm glad I could help you.
All right. Well, thank you, Trent, and I do appreciate it.
I tell you, these stories just keep pulling you in. Because Trent was physically and emotionally abused by his mom, he was terrified about having kids. However, he consciously decided to break the generational curse and draw experience from the loving relationship he had with his dad and become a loving father who enjoys making his kids laugh. By taking his daughter out on dates, he gives examples of what she should expect later in her personal life. After being separated for 15 years, Trent's son reached out to him to reestablish that father-son bond. The result is a new bond, and his strategy is to hit the reset button and to grow the relationship from that point forward. Forget about your past mistakes unless you're asked about your past mistakes. On a final note, Trent suggests that co-parenting dads should leave their pride at the door and find that respect you had when you first met the mother of your child to make the relationship work for the benefit of the child. Oh, and if you're raising multiracial kids, why not have them experience and expose them to the best of those worlds? Great stories. Thanks, Trent. See you all next week.